BG3 seems to be in the center of some drama right now, which revolves around a bunch of data mined and cut content. We also have some interesting facts about some of the origin characters, and even some major cut mechanics that didn't make it into full release. We got a lot to talk about. What's up, World Stripper? Back in the video, we're checking out all things BG3. Okay, so let's just jump right into the drama slash controversy that's going on right now. And essentially what's happening right now is that BG3 is being data mined, and there's a lot of content in there that just isn't in use. Now this obviously does go into a bit of spoiler territory, especially with Act 3 and the endings, but essentially people are finding so much cut content and so much stuff from Act 3 that didn't make it into the full release. And it mainly ties into people kind of being upset with how the game ended, as well as how Act 3 kind of plays into things in the structure of Act 3 compared to Act 1 and 2. But we have a massive poster that's blown up that says a list of all cut content. Again, obvious spoiler warnings, but there's discussion even on things like the Upper City, which is crazy because this is the most obvious one, as Sven actually talked about the affluent Upper City just 2 weeks before launch. And it was described as being fully explorable, yet it's very noticeably absent from the final game. The Upper City does not make an appearance at all in Act 3. In fact, I think we can kind of see what it would have been like from some of the boss areas of Act 3, or at least from the ending boss area of Act 3, whereas we didn't get Upper City at all, or at least not explorable to that extent. And there was also a Shar worship mechanic in early access that the player could select as a deity. It had a bunch of unique dialogue trees set to this, and it was a lot of stuff that was happening in Act 2 as well. And even voice lines were tied to this. Also, we go into Karlach's ending, which was data mined to its fullest extent. This was actually supposed to be into the Upper City and have quests there. And there's a reason why Karlach couldn't be saved. Essentially, we got the bad ending of Karlach no matter what. It was considered the fail state ending. Essentially, if the player neglected to do her quest chain at all. So that's why it kind of felt odd, like no matter how much you did Karlach's quest line and no matter how much you tried to save her, it essentially just gave you this terrible ending. So that was all tied into Upper City. Now there's even more with other side quest companions like Minthera and Halsin. And Minthera has a ton of stuff there. There's even stuff about her having a child in there. Halsin was supposed to have a bunch of more stuff tied to the end game and the Druid Circle. Raphael was supposed to be a merchant, and originally it was supposed to be a viable option, or a fully viable option, to remove your tadpole, which the soul coins was actually what Raphael accepted and why you get so many throughout the game. And that also tied into Avernus, which was supposed to be an entirely playable area just like the Underdark. And it was supposed to be the source for soul coins as well as rare materials, high difficult fights, and special content for Karlach. There's also a ton of mixed stuff around Tav and the Dark Urge, where originally the Dark Urge was actually going to be the origin character and you were always going to be that. There's also a mechanic with Omelian's Ring, which actually Omelian even tells you that it prevents the Illithid powers from taking over, or prevents you from being an absolute in the influence there. However, this ring does none of that and only gives you a charmed ability, even though there are voice lines in the game that essentially tell you that's exactly what it does. There was also supposed to be a major fight with Baal and Orin in the Kresh, which also led into more stuff with Owen and the Dragon, which was meant to corrupt the Githyanki Red Dragon. Again, this was going to lead into a major boss fight. The hag from Act 1 was also supposed to be tied into Act 2, and it is in Act 3, but it was supposed to actually be tied into there more so. And there were supposed to be different hags throughout the game, not just one, which is also mentioned a ton throughout the journals in there. There's a bunch of other companion stuff with Minx and even Jahara that was also cut, which was supposed to be something you're supposed to do with her as well. And that leads on to the full epilogue cutscenes that were data mined, which was that whole 17,000 endings variation. Yet it seems like they are completely absent from the game and only just fades to black. There's a bunch of other story stuff here with Khazador's story and the Baneit cultists, as well as Baal, Merkel, and the Bane deities. There's thousands of dialogue and lines missing from Act 1 that were seemingly cut from Act 1 or the full release of the game. Daisy, or your guardian, was entirely different from what it was supposed to be, and she was actually supposed to be the tadpole itself, basically convincing you to kind of spend the rest of eternity with her. And the scenery was heard by a river, and that's where you actually get the song Down by the River, or at least that portion of that song, which kind of makes sense overall on why it's tied into that. There's a bunch more stuff with the tadpole consequences and even companions and the Illithid worm stuff. And if you haven't noticed, Act 3 companion dialogue is a lot less than the other acts. Also, Mole's story seems to be completely disregarded or not finished in the end there. And there was also supposed to be an entire crafting system, which that's what I kept waiting for. I had all these minerals and gems and things, and I was kind of collecting them, and they never amounted to anything, and I guess I never questioned it until now. But just realizing, yeah, it's literally just vendor trash. You just sell it to the vendor. But that was supposed to be utilized in an entire crafting system. Now, there's a lot of discussion around this here. There's multiple posts going around. There's also a major secret mechanic that was cut from the game, which is called exhaustion. And it's even entirely labeled here for you, the whole condition, everything, and has all the graphical work done. Essentially, exhaustion was a lack of rest that left you exhausted. There are 6 levels of exhaustion, and each level is worse than the last. Completing a long rest reduces your exhaustion by 1 level. I could see that one kind of being left out, as it's kind of like a mechanic that hinders your gameplay. But it does make sense why the companions asked to be rested so frequently or to rest so quickly. Now, surprisingly, we did have a developer tweet, or at least a reply to something that makes it a little bit interesting, which someone on Twitter by the name of Peachkachu said, there are 17,000 different endings on Baldur's Gate 3. I need to play this game 17,000 times or watch 17,000 stream. Where Baldur's Gate 3 official Twitter actually responded yes. Kind of just a funny little tidbit there, and it does probably, with all the permutations, there probably is 17,000 endings. Although realistically, a lot of the choices that you made kinda didn't come to fruition and really didn't matter overall. Don't get me wrong, Baldur's Gate 3 is an incredible game, and it really is more so the journey than it is the ending. However, I do have to agree that the ending did feel very lackluster, and there's a lot of issues there with that. I think a lot of gripes and complaints people have about Act 3 is actually very warranted. It's not to say that this game doesn't deserve extremely high scores, it does. However, there are some glaring issues with Act 3, and you could definitely tell there was a ton of cut content here. We've had a ton of comments like this here where it says, I wonder how many of these are going to be patched in the definitive edition. I guess this is something similar that happened in DOS 2, where there was a lot of stuff redone and kind of revamped. There's also been a ton of discussion about them rushing it out the gate because they were trying to get in front of Starfield. I think some of the major ones are the Karlax ending especially, which seems to be a huge contention point among players, which I definitely agree. It's really just kind of a sad ending that they did with that, unfortunately. Overall, there's a lot of good points here with people coming up with different things and different ideologies around what went wrong and what kind of happened. I do remember during one of the panels or one of the interviews with Sven, he did say there was like an emergency thing that was happening. People think that that's what happened with Act 3 in the upper area or the upper city. People had said that Sven is not really known for kind of lying about stuff or saying something that isn't in the game. So it is kind of odd that 2 weeks before the game came out, he mentioned that the upper city was fully explorable. However, we didn't get that in the game at all. It is just a very odd thing there. Overall, I do hope they eventually kind of bring all this stuff to fruition, or at least explain what's going on with the game, if there's some sort of DLC stuff with the upper city. Now, there is a little odd fact here with Halson that I thought I would mention, and his wild-shaped black bear is actually labeled 3 different things. So he's labeled 3 different types of bears. The first one being a black bear, then a polar bear, and finally a cave bear in the combat log. I'm sure this is entirely purposeful and just kind of like a running bit with the company. We also had a post on the sub for Tab Tuesday, so if you do want to show off your tab, then you could post here as well. Also, if you do want to see some of the cut content other than the stuff that is in the Reddit post down below, I'm going to link a video that someone posted with Wither's cut content. It's actually 57 or 56 minutes long, and this has a ton of dialogue from the epilogue that just goes to show how much stuff was actually cut. But yeah, let me know your guys' thoughts on all the cut content. Let me know what you guys think and how it affects your opinion about the game overall. I guess we'll have to wait and see on updates about it and see if they actually do address what's going on here. And if there is any updates, I'll be sure to let you guys know. But that should about cover for today's video. If you like, subscribe, and until the next one. Deuce!